I'm out here in my backyard garden, and it's still a relatively new piece of my property in that I've been converting it over from, this was a high tunnel where I'm sitting right now. I've got these raised beds in here, and I wanted to talk to you guys today about a new interplant that I found that I really like, and I think it's been an absolute success. And this is interplanting, as far as I've talked about it in the past. I cover this in my book a little bit, but the primary strategy that I've been interested in with interplanting is not so much based on things like fertility requirements or beneficial insects or things like that. My strategy is more about time stacking. And what I mean by that is I'm stacking a short-term crop with a long-term crop. So I'm just kind of mimicking a timeline. So I've got a short timeline and a longer timeline. And in my book, I talk about ones like interplanting things like radishes or quick-growing greens with longer-term crops like, say, patty pan squash. In my book, I call them steady crops. Because in my book, I was focused on primarily crops for urban farmers that could yield a return in the short and long term. So the one I'm going to show you today is cabbage and basil. And so this is something I wouldn't have done on my farm, because to grow a crop like cabbage for an urban farmer, I don't think it's worth the money or the time. But that's not my context right now. My context right now is homesteading and growing as much nutritionally dense crops for my family to eat as possible. So this one that I want to show you today is interplanting cabbage and basil. And this is a short term and a long term. So cabbage is a very long term crop, and basil in the summer is a super short term crop. So as I film this video, we are mid-August. I transplanted this basil and cabbage at the same time. So I transplanted both of these about a month ago, and they would have been started from plugs would have been started about 3 weeks prior to that. So cabbage is a crop I have done a little bit of in my farming, but not a lot. The main reason is, like I said, it's a long-term crop. It doesn't fit a lot of the requirements that I wanted for an urban farming crop, but again, that's not my context here. And it's not a steady crop in like what I talk about in my book. The only types of crops that I recommended for urban farms that are long-term are crops that you can steadily harvest, so that you can, like something like kale or patty pan squash or tomatoes, long-term crops that have a constant yield. Cabbage is not one of those crops, but that's okay. Again, this isn't my context right now. But the cabbage is a long-term crop and the basil is a short-term crop. So what's just happened here is I planted these all at the same time, and essentially what I did, I put my basils in a 6-inch spacing, and I've put my cabbages at an 18-inch center. So cabbage here, zigzag cabbage there, zigzag cabbage there, zigzag cabbage there, so on and so forth. And then a basil plant every 6 inches in between that. So these beds are actually 32 inches on the inside. So they're a little bit wider than my standardized bed on my farming. And that's just because they're raised and I get more space in there. But, you know, for all intents and purposes, a 30-inch bed. But the great thing about a raised bed that I've discovered in gardening is you can really go right to the edge. So I'm not so sure, but maybe it would. I'm not so sure that this type of interplanting strategy would work on a standardized bed system. I mean, it depends on your walkways, because as you can see, you get quite a bit of overhang. And on these beds in particular, I've got about 30 inches in between each bed as well. So, and you can tell because my pavers in between are 2 feet, and then there's still a few inches on each side. So they're 30 inches between, so there's plenty of room, because I've got, you know, the next bed over here, I've got beans kind of hanging over the sides there. And maybe that one's another topic for another time, but that's a cannabis and beans interplant, but we'll save that for another video. And also same thing there as a short-term and long-term crop. But so the strategy here is the basil is ready to harvest before these cabbages get too big. And so you can see right now, these cabbages are just about at the time they're going to explode. Like, they're going to get big. You know, you start to get a lot of bottom leaves coming out, and the basil is reaching up. And so the one thing that's important to mention with this strategy, my strategy on this wasn't, or my intention wasn't to have basil throughout the entire lifespan of the cabbage. It's more to have 1 or 2 good blasts of basil that I harvested, and I just harvested about 10 pounds of it, and that was the first picking. So all I'm really interested in at this point is one more picking. I might come back in 2 weeks, and mind you, I should say, it depends on whether my wife wants to process that much basil for pesto. We'll see. But I've freed up enough room by coming and I'm just topping all that basil, getting all the main heads out, which is now bringing more light down to this cabbage, and it's going to let it take over. And then I'll come back and just kind of take the last remaining bit of basil, and then we'll be done, and then I'll pull that plant out, and then this bed will be cabbage going into the fall. And that's all I am really concerned about. Now, if you've grown any of these crops in the past, one thing you might be saying is, hey Curtis, aren't both of those crops very prone to aphids? They are. The answer is yes, they absolutely are. And I want to share with you a trick that I discovered with cabbage. So basil will get aphids on it. Primarily in my experience, in greenhouses they get aphids on it. In the field, I've never had so much of a problem. However, if this cabbage was really infested with aphids, those aphids would probably head over to the basil. But that's not an issue for me right now, because what I did was, I first started noticing aphids in this cabbage about 3 weeks ago, and it wasn't too long from the time I had put it in the ground. And what you'll notice when you start to get aphids is that you'll look in the core of the plant in the center, and you'll start to see them. But the first place you'll actually notice, and you can actually see a little bit of aphid pressure in there on the bottom outside leaves. Very little though, and they're gonna be there, right? Like you're gonna have, yeah, see there's some action under there. But on my basil, I flip under the leaves, and that's where you always want to look, is under the leaves. I don't see any aphids, and I went through pretty thoroughly before I started picking this to check, because the last thing I want is aphids in my pesto. But what I did was, with this cabbage, so 3 weeks ago, I went, and most of the aphid pressure, there's a little bit on the inside, but a lot of it was on the very outer leaves. What I did was, I came in and I stripped all the outer leaves off. All the ones that were kind of hanging down, I'll just show you, I'll just take this one for the hell of it. I stripped all those leaves off, and I essentially stripped the plant right down to the base. And then I came in with some safer soap, and I just sprayed the hell out of them. So I basically reduced the size of the plants down to 1/3 of what they were. All I essentially left was this core and a few of these leaves. And I came in with safer soap, and I just sprayed all around the underside and a lot in the core. But the key here is I first stripped the outside leaves off, because I want to reduce the amount of stuff I have to spray, because then I just am using more spray, right? So safer soap is a certified organic. It's hard to call it a pesticide, but it does seem to really slow aphids down. But it's like a soap basically. It's inert. It's not harmful to humans. Aphids just don't like it. I don't know if it kills them per se, but they don't like it. And so once I did that, I came back the next few days, and there was no aphids left. So that really knocked them down. And so what's going to happen at this point is, I'm going to let this stuff keep growing. It's going to get bigger. I'm going to come and check, because I do see a little bit of aphid pressure on the outside of these leaves. Not much though. Like, even look at that leaf. There's nothing. There's not a single aphid there. Let's look at this one. Nothing. So there's very little aphid pressure at this time. Like, they're there, right? Pests are going to be there, but it's nothing to worry about. So I'm going to let this go for another 2 weeks, and then see where my basil's at. And then I might get a second picking, and then at that point, I'm going to pull the rest out and let the cabbage take over the bed. So that's my basil and cabbage video, you guys. I hope you found that one helpful or inspiring. So I'm not posting a lot on YouTube these days. I've been really kind of enjoying the summer just spending a lot more time with my family and doing all that. I don't really feel the need to make videos about my day-to-day life, but I am posting consistently to FromTheField.farm, so I'd encourage anybody that wants to join up to that to do so. I'll leave a live link down below in the show notes. If somebody wants to join up now, they can just follow that link to join up. But I'm doing these YouTube live sessions. I'm doing almost every Thursday, so we're going to continue that. So you can join me tomorrow here at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time or 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I kind of go through my weekly Q&A. From the Field members send me questions, and then I answer them in a video. So I'll do those questions first, and then we'll do super chats and just general questions after that, and we'll just hang out and shoot the breeze. So that'll be tomorrow, Thursday, at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time here on YouTube. And next week I'll be doing it with my good buddy Jean-Martin Fortier at his farm, and doing the same thing. All right, guys, we'll see you later.